Hey everyone, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Wale. And in this episode of IoT All the Things, it's all about automotive. We're going to do connected mobility solutions, machine learning at the edge, Kinesis video, and all things data lakes and analytics. And Rudy, what else is coming?
Don't forget to stay tuned for our IoT All the Tricks section where we'll be talking about the IoT Jumpstart. So, everyone, get ready for IoT All the Things.
All the things. We have Dean Phillips joining us from Automotive. So Dean's going to dive into a whole bunch of really cool use cases on the tech. So I'm super excited about that.
Hey guys, I'm Dean Phillips. I'm worldwide tech lead for Automotive. I'm based in the Detroit area. So good to be on.
Dude, I think it's awesome to have you on because as we think about all the kind of hot topics, especially in IoT, as we get to scale, there are customers that are looking for things like how do you reduce cost in terms of IoT? So we've launched things like IoT jobs and some repricing and allowing you to kind of do updates at scale. But I think what's really cool about the automotive space is that you're probably seeing all these kind of trends come up over and over again in connected mobility architectures and in-vehicle architectures. So it's just great to dive in with you and just really get a sense of how this landscape is evolving.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We can talk a little bit about intelligent edge architectures we're seeing customers implement in their vehicles, next-gen connected mobility solutions. Maybe we'll talk about our new solution that we're going to be releasing shortly to enable all of that. Also talk about the importance of like deep updates for over-the-air updates and software and even some stuff around data lakes. So lots of cool stuff we can get into today.
Sweet. I'd love to dive into that first one, like with connected mobility architectures. Like what is that, right? For people who are coming in and like connected mobility, like I thought it was just vehicles. Like I thought we were just going to be sitting there looking at Elon Musk or a rocket, a Tesla truck. But like, what is that? Is that really?
I've joked with the guys a lot saying, we're going to need to a third axis to the maps so we can deal with the flying cars eventually. But the fact is that we've got a lot of our customers building, micro mobility solutions. So you think about scooters and the different things you can hop on the streets, to get around. So it's not always just a vehicle. It's a lot of intelligent use cases supporting a smarter city, connecting all the things, as you like to say, so traffic lights and roadside units. You name it. It's pretty interesting. So it's not just all about the car. When you think about the importance of software to automotive, vehicles have 100 plus 150 million lines of code in them today. And that's just increasing. And so, something like a scooter, for example, and when you have a bug or it doesn't work properly, the only way to fix it is to shoot down a new bundle of software to that thing. So, hopefully we'll get in today. We'll show you a little bit about how the connected mobility solution can enable that for customers and, point out just the state in automotive. Last year, I think there were 85 software related recalls across all of the automotive industry. And then this year we've already had in the first quarter about 12, I think, were reported by NHTSA, which is the National Highway Safety and Traffic association. So if you think about all of that, there's a lot of complexity. And so we're trying to help customers enable those new solutions in their cars.
I think it's really interesting, Dean. You touched on something that is like when I brought my car in, it was basically like a software update, right? So like they came in and like, we're just going to apply a patch to help fix maybe how precision was done or how they understand tire pressure. How is that kind of edge architecture? And then updates, like you mentioned, it's just so much more software. How is that kind of managed? What are some of the things you're seeing from your customers?
Well, it's a number of things. I talked about the increase in the amount of software going into vehicles. Then, you think about all the connectivity solutions we have today where, you can unlock your doors or start your car. You can preset the cabin temperature in your vehicle, and that requires a lot of IoT connectivity. And the complexity there just keeps increasing. So a lot of the cars, we've been doing this for a number of years, right? A decade plus. But we've solved the basic connectivity, and now we're really focused on enabling the more advanced use cases. So being able to dynamically, change the amount of data coming from a vehicle, kind of like, you look at a CloudWatch log and you can go from like standard to like, forget the level, but where you're setting much more data more frequently. And you want to do that for a short period of time so you can do the diagnostics and the analytics to figure out what's wrong. And so having an architecture in the car that can support that is something that, everybody's rushing to implement today.
You mentioned a really cool part of that is actually all the data you get, because like part of it is the idea that you need to be able to, pull information off the sensors. But then a larger part is how do you actually implement a data lake? Like how do you take all these disparate sensors, turn it into something that relates to a car, and then look at trends over time? So how is that kind of data lake, data processing being done in the automotive space?
Yeah, that's a great topic. I mean, we're seeing data lakes being spun up across the board with our customers. BMW is a great example where they talk about how they've taken the data from all their vehicles and all of their different locations around the world, and they've created this cloud data hub, they call it. And they've been able to capture all this data centrally and enable the lines of business across the company to identify new business opportunities and challenges, and actually freeing it for analysis so you can make new features like adaptive seat heaters that turn on and off automatically without a user being engaged or being involved in that decision. So those are just some of the things that they can start to enable with machine learning and analytics from the data they've captured.
If you're thinking about like how data lakes come together, it is kind of a mix of AWS services. So you've got things like S3, right? All of our storage. And I always joke, if you ever have to take an AWS solution architect exam, the trick I got was all roads lead to S3. So if you get stuck,
just pick S3 at the answer. You're good.
I passed all mine so far. So.
Redshift's another one, and we see that involved in these data lakes. And then obviously, you've got to move data around from one repository to another, transform it. So things like Glue, we see a lot of that. Of course, EMR, Elastic MapReduce for the Hadoop workload. So a lot of these technologies people are kind of putting together today, and addressing that analysis zone, if you will, on the data they've captured.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think some of the other services I've seen used for some of the in-flight processing is like you have IoT Analytics, which is a service that lets you do some like filtering, enrichment of data on the fly, but then also Kinesis Analytics, Kinesis Streams, Kinesis Firehose. You have lots of tools in your proverbial tool belt to figure out how to get your data in the right format for your data lake.
Absolutely. One of the use cases we released a couple of years ago in our connected vehicle solution was an example of a streaming analytics application to do anomaly detection on data captured coming from the vehicle. So what we did, if you think about Kinesis data streams and Firehose, the data comes in little messages. And so with Kinesis Data Analytics, you write a SQL-like application where you can select star from, topic Y, where data value equals X. And then you can start to do some selection and processing of those messages in real time. And so the example we did using a random cut forest was identify anomalies on oil temperature. That was just the one example we implemented. But you can see how you can combine a number of different, data values and messages from different topics and figure out, okay, this is the analytics app I want to build. And so you can use that pattern, that example, as the foundation for your solution.
Super interesting too, though. It's like we're starting to see more object detection at the edge. So eventually it could land in S3. But Dean, you're seeing like this use case where you want to do, distracted driver as an example. So like all this intelligence eventually kind of at the edge. So what are you seeing in that space, and what kind of tools are you seeing customers use?
A really cool example that we showcased at CES this past January, and also at reInvent, where we talked about what Denso is doing, and they're building their next generation edge hardware and software component called their Mobility IoT Core. And in this, they're looking at technologies like Greengrass and machine learning inference, where they're taking partner applications from, say, an insurance company and deploying, an object detection algorithm uh, in the vehicle, so that they can, detect things like rolling stops, or combining it with CAN data. And they have this concept of video events, or events that get created from the vehicle and published over IoT. And so an example would be like, if one of these events takes place, they can capture the data coming from 6+ cameras in the vehicle and stream that up to the cloud using Kinesis video streams, to then connect those events that you publish to the actual video stream. So you can now look at it after the fact, share with your partners, and they can use it for other use cases. So that's an insurance example. There's a lot of others that you can begin to imagine.
Awesome. And I see at Twitch there's a comment about how we can go into some of the code there. So maybe what I'll do is I'll switch over. I had to go to my backup laptop, so I'll actually be walking through some of the architectures and where you can get the code. So almost like Star Trek, I'm going to the command center here over to my right. So I'll hop into this console. If you want to take a look at how this will be set up, there's a link we'll post to Twitch so you can take a look and see how this works. But to dive in a little bit more about how the components come together, you can do some of this at the edge. So there's a couple of components that you can end up running. There's this concept of SageMaker Neo. So when we're talking about how some of this runs at the edge, you can think about taking these pre-compiled models. So I apologize for the technical difficulty, which was really funny because it was kind of like, have you ever been on one of those conference calls where the other person drops and you're like on a roll? And then you stop and you realize you're alone. Like that's about how I felt walking through that example. So on this other laptop, I was pointing out a few things to see. So I mentioned KVS running machine learning in the cloud based on image detection. So what I was showing is that you can get KVS set up pretty easily. The way I actually like to do it is you get two options. One, you can run it in Java. So we talked about Java. Am I still here too? Has everyone still got me?
Yep, you're there.
Okay, awesome. I'll take silence as I'm still on. So.
You're all worried now that it's going to hit.
Yeah, I know. So for the KVS side, you can run it in Java, but I actually prefer running in a Docker container. So what you'll end up having to do is install ECR for a registry. And then what will happen is when you install it, you'll basically just pass over information to connect to your camera. So I can't run this live because the camera is me. So that would be very strange. But you can connect it over WebRTC. You can do WebRTC. You can do RTSP streams. You can do network-based IP cameras to pull the frame off of the data. For the actual image detection, what I was showing is that when you launch this CloudFormation template, you'll basically pull in a SageMaker notebook to detect images. And a SageMaker notebook looks like this. So within SageMaker, what you're going to end up seeing is you'll end up seeing the ability to pull the individual file images, do the categorization of that image, and then basically get an output. So I was giving the analogy before that if I look away from the TV screen, you can get an idea that you can no longer really detect the front of my face. You can detect the side of it. So you can do things like, is this a face or not? Is it, someone is texting so you can see a phone in their hand? And those are things that you can do in the cloud based on the image classification. So,
well, you mentioned containers as a great way to deploy an app, especially for doing things at the edge, not just in the cloud, like in your examples. So we see automotive customers doing a lot of work with containers at the edge. So it gives them a nice isolated way to kind of distribute apps down to their edge clients running in the vehicle. And you can do that, of course, with Greengrass.
when we post the links for people to follow along, you can do things like mention the Greengrass kind of with the ML and the containers. You can also do some of the things kind of sidecar. So you run SageMaker Neo, run Greengrass separately with container support. So there's a fair amount of options you get as your choices in implementing Auto. It'd be great to maybe dive into what you're seeing in some of the provisioning and OTA cases. So I know, Rudy, that's a passion for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, in general with provisioning, it's such a I'd say important part of infrastructure. Most people kind of overlook it. So it's good that we've seen some success with some of our customers, especially with automotive. So how are we applying some of the best practices that we've learned for others, Dean?
Yeah. So, we talked about the solution a little bit earlier. We have a connected mobility solution, which is our next generation of the connected vehicle solution that's already available on AWS. And inside that solution, we used a large component from our connected devices framework, CDF, we call it. And what that has is a whole section of code and APIs all around provisioning. So with that framework, we can very easily enable a multi-tiered provisioning process where it gets elevated in privilege when you go from one stage to the next. And an example would be having a low privilege certificate after it gets burned in. And so, when you're manufacturing devices, you need to typically, if you're not doing it in real time, I think a lot of times we bulk generate certificates, create things, offline, and then we burn it all into the software. And then when we first key on the vehicle at the manufacturing facility, then we apply a low privilege certificate and kind of give it the ability to do some basic telemetry. And then at the dealership, when you take ownership, we can use, say, a mobile app and punch in a key, synchronize your relationship to that vehicle, and then give you full privileges. So all of that's supported in the connected mobility solution, and you can customize that to your needs.
Okay, and you mentioned the CDF or connected device framework. Can you kind of go into that a bit more?
Absolutely. Yeah, the connected device framework is the foundation upon which we built our connected mobility solution that should be available within the next month or so on our solution site. And what we did was, we took all of the experience from, hundreds of our professional services engagements and kind of built this framework called the connected device framework. And in it, we support a very flexible elevated provisioning process where you can support the burn-in of the software and the certificates that allow it to connect to the IoT framework, IoT core. And we can do whitelisting, bulk provisioning. And then once we have the device, the telematics control units kind of ready to go, they get assembled in the vehicles. And then when the vehicle rolls off the assembly line on key on and first key on, we then assign like a low privilege certificate and we give it a policy. And from there, it might be in like transport mode till you get to the dealership.
Yeah.
And then the vehicle gets sold. And we'll then give it full privileges for all the telemetry and the being able to send commands to the vehicle. And so it supports it's being in use by a number of customers, heavy equipment manufacturing, and some others, and working with customers today in automotive on this. So it's pretty flexible.
Okay. And you say you've got the limited privileges, then when you actually purchase the car, it gets elevated. Is there ever a case where you might want to remove some of the privileges? If, say,
Well,
someone,
of course,
yeah,
yeah. So yeah, you'll be able to deactivate particular vehicles if there's a threat of any kind. And then when we identify problems, we spoke a lot earlier about software recalls and the value of
yep.
over-the-air updates. And so we can use IoT. We use IoT jobs to schedule over-the-air updates, and we can do this from the Fleet Manager UI that we talked about a minute ago.
All the data that's coming through, and like you mentioned, there's a data lake, and you want to analyze everything so you can improve systems and continuously do that. Is there in-vehicle telemetry that's coming through, or do you have any anomaly detection? Can you kind of go
Yeah,
into that a bit?
sure thing. So we have a number of different use cases that we support in the connected mobility solution. So we do things like just secure data offload. So getting that whole telemetry stream goes into IoT Core, and then we use Kinesis Firehose to drop it into S3, of course, which we discussed as being the heart of anything that runs on AWS.
Can't dodge it.
And then, yeah, and then you build your data lake on top of that. Secondly, we on that same stream, we can build a Kinesis data analytics application where you look at anomalies from the data, and then you can start to build vehicle health reports, things like that. We also surface DTCs, which is a diagnostic trouble code. So when you have your vehicle fires off a lot of DTCs, when those take place, we stream those, and then we write them to Dynamo. We send them a notification message to trigger some kind of downstream process, and even geofencing. So there's you can start to do some geospatial use cases. If your vehicle enters a particular location, we can kick off an event, and that could be any number of things.
So you're saying if I'm going to go get some ice cream and I end up going to the ice cream shop, that they're going to just be like, Rudy, you've arrived. Here's your ice cream.
Exactly. Yeah. So they say like Dean gained all this weight during the COVID-19 crisis because he was eating gallons of ice cream. So whenever I go by the grocery store, I'll get an offer that'll say, "Hey, come on in and get that special." So, yeah, that number of use cases around sending offers, but even like there are the safety, public safety related use cases related to approaching different areas for, say, weather, extreme weather events, or chemical spills, train goes off the rails or something like that. So we've seen a number of those kinds of examples, and many customers have used their telemetry system to give the location of vehicles to the government in crises related to weather for safety concerns.
Okay, cool, man. I mean, it's fantastic to hear that there's all these use cases that are possible, and who knows the ones we haven't heard yet. People are still inventing.
Right.
They just keep going.
Yeah.
But when you're storing it also with the data, do you have an example? I mean, is there any kind of demo you can take us through?
Yeah, so we can spin up the solution right here. So here's a quick clip of us filtering some vehicles. So we've got our connected fleet live, and there's some vehicles moving around, and we're kind of zooming in on them and getting down to a collection of vehicles. And as you zoom in, the list on the right will get smaller as you approach. And then here's an example of a vehicle where we click on it. You can see some basic telemetry. You can see the trip record. So here's the latest trip, and we'll draw that route and give you some elapsed time, how many miles, for example. Yeah. And then we have this concept of video events that we talked about earlier, where a video event was thrown off where there was motion outside your parked vehicle. And then we're going to show you here the video clip that was captured from the vehicle. And from the cameras in the car.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool to think that you can do this. But we're really happy to showcase that at reInvent with our partner Denso. So that's just an example of the solution. And here, we talked about anomalies and DTCs where we've got a problem. It's software related. So we're going to identify all those vehicles that have those problems. We'll zoom in on the Las Vegas area. And these are the vehicles now that we want to implement an over-the-air update for example. So just showing different ways that you can filter and refine that list on the right. So we'll go through it all, and now we'll clear it out, and we'll actually show how we can deploy an update. Let's take a look at this one. We're going to schedule an update. We'll grab the software bundle for those vehicles, and then we'll deploy it. And then this is all enabled by the connected device framework, which will kick off a collection of IoT jobs. And then you can monitor the status of those updates. And the software and the vehicle will then determine, okay, when it's safe to apply those updates, and that can be offline. Now, clearly, we know that customers are using partners to do sophisticated over-the-air update solutions. But in the case of micromobility, or where you've got aftermarket devices you've deployed in your fleet, where maybe you want to take control over the update of those bundles, you can use our framework in the connected mobility solution to do that. So it's just kind of a good starting point and reference for you to kind of implement your custom solution. That's one of the things that's so exciting about joining AWS was the continuous innovation that with all these new services coming out and new features for them. It is a challenge, but that's kind of where the hunger to learn something new really helps you stay aware of all the new capabilities. So, take advantage of your solution architects from AWS to learn new stuff. Ask for immersion days where you can dive deep, get your hands on code. Lots of resources on our site for you to discover the new capabilities.
Yeah, and to kind of add on to that, I gotta give a shout out to training and certification. They've got lots of videos that you guys can watch. You might even see myself, Wale, and Dean in those videos. So if you don't get enough of a dose of us now, you can kind of go to training and certification, check it out there, AWS.training. And it's just a fantastic way to get started with videos. From there, if you want to go into the documentation, you can go further, but it's a nice entry point if you want these bite-sized chunks, or if you want to think of it as snackable learning. If there's no more questions, let's see. Any more questions? Oh, wait. How are connected vehicles related to smart cities? I think that's one for you,
I
Dean.
can answer that. Yeah. So the connected vehicles actually have a significant role to play with a smart city. As cities start to instrument, we're kind of monitoring the evolution of vehicle to vehicle to infrastructure technologies, and I think we'll see a lot more on this with 5G and MEC applications and the cellular vehicle to everything standards that are emerging. So this will help us coordinate traffic, will help autonomous vehicles and vehicles with ADAS technologies understand what's coming around the corner that you can't see. So this is an emerging space, and stay tuned. So we'll talk a little bit how AWS Wavelength kind of fits into that along with the cellular vehicle to everything.
Again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Dean, it was awesome having you. So through the challenges, hopefully you learned a lot about all things mobility. I'm Wale again, worldwide technical lead for IoT.
And I'm Rudy. I'm a senior solutions architect. We're joined by Dean Phillips today. Say bye, Dean.
Take care, everybody. Enjoyed having the experience today.
This has been another episode of Let's Do It,
IoT.
Let's do it.
all the things.
All the things.